Okay, so recording has started. If anybody does not want their face shown, you're more than welcome to turn off your video. And this recording will be available to all of our neighbors in York Centre riding who have shown interest in the election on Dan's YouTube channel. So he'll be posting that later on tonight. I wanted to just go through a couple of rules of the evening. The purpose of tonight really is just to hear out our candidate, our Conservative candidate, Joel Etienne, get to know him, get to know his platform. There will be a set group of questions that were really developed by the BMAG group itself. There were many submissions and a short list was established. And so we're just going to stick with those same questions. There will be a question and answer period at the end of Joel's responses to the questions. And that's when you have an opportunity to ask any kind of question that you want. We're just asking people to be respectful, refrain from offensive language. This is not an opportunity to attack or go on the attack. It's an opportunity for us to learn as neighbors about all of the candidates. So just a reminder of that for everybody. It is recording, and I'll introduce Joel now. And I know his campaign manager, Abraham, is here as well. Joel, hi, and welcome to our neighborhood group.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, Dan. Hello, Andrea.
Hello. So why don't we get started, given that we're all getting ready for tomorrow evening's high holidays, or many of us in the neighborhood. Why don't we start by asking the first question. Tell us why you're running to be the MP for York Centre, Joel.
Thank you. Mes amis, bonsoir. It's been a terrible and for much too many, a horrible 20 months. And I would like to first acknowledge your troubles and hardships and wish all of you a better new year for those who celebrate the Jewish New Year, Shana Tova. My maternal grandfather was a rabbi who served in the French resistance during the war and came to Canada in 1964. My father was a Haitian political exile, an academic who faced torture in jail. In the background of their suffering, their trauma, I became a human rights lawyer. I was born and raised in Moncton, New Brunswick. I came to York Centre 23 years ago in a $300 Chevy Cavalier, with only dreams to build a life and a family. York Centre is a wonderful ecosystem, and its MPs are supposed to honor this seat as a community trust. As an immigration lawyer, I've worked with people from every culture and from every background. When I ask them why Canada, why York Centre, the words are different, but the meaning is the same. Nobody comes to Canada for the weather. In Hebrew, we say shalom bayis, a better life. Mejor lugar in Spanish. Casa migliore in Italian. Isang mabuting tahanan in Tagalog. In Russian, it's a luchi dum. As you already know, York Centre is blessed with Canada's largest Filipino diaspora community. We have a cherished Italian community, a cherished Jewish and Greek community, and many other wonderful people from all over the world. We are supposed to be a beacon of freedom and opportunity to the world. I'm running in this election because I live with concern. I'm concerned with the stagnation of upward mobility under the Trudeau Liberal regime. We stand in York Centre as 247 out of 338 economically. Yet, yes, I've worked 20-hour days for more than 20 years, and I started with nothing. But as an employer, I'm concerned that the starting salaries for lawyers in York Centre are basically the same as my starting salary was 20 years ago. And yet, the cost of a new house is 10 times more. Let me be clear. With all the hard work and good faith in the world, I would never be able to build for myself and my family today what I was able to do over 2 decades ago. Rapid inflation, food, gas, housing. I would have no house today, no business if I was starting out today. I want to secure Canada. We need to secure our future. I want a Canada that manufactures vaccines, that can supply PPEs when they are needed to many of our essential workers, first responders, teachers and medical workers, PSW, LTC workers who were left behind during the pandemic, which is not over. Here we are in the fourth wave, having to campaign, going through an election, a $600 million election. I'm concerned by the rise of anti-Semitism under Justin Trudeau's Liberals. The Neighborhood reports anti-Semitic crimes are up 18.3% in the country, with more than 250 known incidents this year. I'm concerned by the rise in crime under Justin Trudeau. And more importantly, I dream of a Canada that does not count on or take direction from the planet's worst violators of human rights, like the CCP, and Iran and its Revolutionary Guard. I've slept too many sleepless nights defending and preventing the deportation of democracy activists from these countries. And I fully understand how it is that Canada has become an enabler and an appeaser of bad conduct. Your choice in this election is clear: more of the same, more uncertainty, more unkept promises, less prosperity, less safety. Lack of safety, or someone who understands what keeps you at the night. Someone who will fight for a better future for your children and grandchildren every day.
Thank you, Joel. I'm going to skip around to the questions in a little bit of a different order, just to stay on the theme that you're talking about right now, which is really the financial hardships and high unemployment and difficulty for people to just make a living. So there is a shortage of workers, but there's also high unemployment. And what will you and your party do to get York Centre residents back to work?
You know, inflation, cost of living is really at an all-time high. Inflation is at a 10-year high under the Trudeau government. We've got a detailed proposal to get the Liberal debt and the drive inflation crisis under control. You know, we're going to take the side of consumers. The cell phone, internet, we have among the highest prices in the world. We'll reduce prices by promoting international competition if countries also allow our companies to compete. We're going to connect all of Canada to high-speed internet by 2025. We're going to actively promote local community and business initiatives, projects, so they're less reliant on big tech. Food prices are way up. We'll crack down on price fixing by massively increasing financial penalties, $100 million of fines to make it hurt, and holding executives personally liable if they engage in price fixing. They'll go to jail. We're going to reject it. We're going to reject damaging mergers that reduce competition. We're going to open up banking competition with fintech companies. And Canada's recovery plan will double the Canada worker benefit to a maximum of $2,800 for individuals and $5,000 for families.
Okay, and a little bit connected, the price of everything is rising faster than wages, and it's making it very difficult for many of us to afford the things that we want or need. What can help our riding in particular, given its diversity?
You know, the Conservatives got us out of the last recession after the 2008 crash. We were then able to balance our budgets, and we're going to be able to do it again. But we can't do it so quickly because we're in trouble. You know, the practical reality in terms of our economy. I remember when Ontario was able to manufacture more cars than any other jurisdiction in North America. It wasn't Detroit or Michigan, it wasn't Mexico that was number one in manufacturing, it was us, but that's all gone. Those jobs are gone. And really the only game in town is residential real estate and housing in terms of what's keeping the economy going, especially that our main streets are falling apart. And so ultimately we're going to have to be careful when it comes to tackling the deficit. We've got a plan to do it over 10 years, but we've got to basically bolster and re-energize our main streets and our local economy. So ultimately, we've got a Canada job search plan, which will pay at least 25% of the salary of net new hires for 6 months after CEWS expires. To those who have been unemployed long-term, our plan will cover up to 50% of the salary for those who have been employed for 6 months or more. And this is quite meaningful. I've been an employer now for 20 years. But I was an employee for my first 2 years as a lawyer here in Toronto when I first moved and was called to the bar. And my first job, the economy wasn't fantastic. I remember going in, we were a whole bunch of people applying for a job, and then the employer looked at me and he says, "Well, it's not like you're going to pay me for me to hire you." And I said, "You know what? Maybe I've got something just as good," because I did qualify at the time for a wage subsidy, and it was a wage subsidy for 4 months. And I actually think that that's what got me over the line, and it got me fantastic training. And with that training, I'd segue that into my own employment. So I think this is a great initiative that really partners. That provides a really good partnership between what government can offer and what the private sector can generate. It's especially small businesses who really need the boost right now and don't have the liquidity and the capital to take a lot of chances in terms of hiring. So we're going to, like I said, work on balancing the budget over 10 years. We know that there's a shortage of workers. Of course, we haven't had a lot of immigration for almost 2 years now. The borders have been essentially closed that way. So we do have good plans with, for example, and this is I think going to be very relevant to a lot of our members of our new Canadian communities. I know that it's been resonating at the door a lot with a lot of members of the Filipino community. What you should know is, in terms of personal support workers, historically, it's been a great program for young families who need nannies and caregivers for young children, but it's been a very difficult program when it comes to assisting seniors, because ultimately when seniors are in distress, the processing times have been very long, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And, unfortunately, sometimes it's just too late. And you have people who get into a process of qualifying. By the time they qualify, they're just not needed anymore. So it is going to be a priority item with the Conservative Party to massively reduce processing times. And I think that's going to have both a cathartic impact with our seniors, but also with our local economy and with a very important new Canadian community.
Okay, thank you for that. Again, I'm trying to keep the questions just grouped together according to theme, even though they may not have been presented to me in that order. So with that said, there is a significant degree of concern within our own riding about the high cost of rent, the inability to purchase a home. So what is you or your party's plan for addressing the lack of affordable housing for many individuals in the riding that you hope to represent?
Well, we have what we call a housing first approach, which has been, historically watered down by the current federal government, and it's to aid. Your question, Edra, was with respect to homelessness, correct?
It's actually lack of affordable housing, and the rent is going out of control that people can't even afford to rent basement apartments anymore. Right.
Oh, fair enough. Sorry, I had heard homelessness on my computer. My apologies. In terms of affordable housing, we want to implement comprehensive changes to the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act. What you need to understand is that what you believe is your equity in your home may not actually be the equity of your home, because there's been massive influxes of monies, oftentimes illegal monies. Monies that are money laundered and that are basically hidden in the housing market. And it creates a lot of problems because you've got situations of empty homes, of homes that are bought but are just not occupied, right? And it's been driving the prices of a home very, very high. It's certainly tied to other structural difficulties that we have. For example, the federal government's refusal to put the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the terrorist arm of the Ayatollahs of Iran, on a terror list. Right. And so, we continue to have influxes of those types of monies that come into those markets because there's really, it's easy to hide, and there's certainly not a lot of verification, and it's a way for bad people to park their money. So in terms of wanting to tackle it on and to do something about it, we're going to give FinTrack, which is the electronic regulator that supervises the flow of money, with law enforcement and prosecutors, the tools necessary to identify, halt, and prosecute money laundering in Canadian real estate markets. We're going to turn that into a priority because it is a problem. We're going to ban foreign speculators, investors to buy homes they don't intend to live in. If you want to buy a house, live in it. But at the same time, if foreign investors want to, we're going to give them opportunities to build multifamily rental housing. And why I think this is a great idea personally, we all know that in the real estate development world, multifamily residential is the gold standard of what people want to invest in. They don't want to buy commercial buildings because, especially after the pandemic, they don't know what the value of that is going to be tomorrow. They don't want to buy industrial lots because, again, hard to get tenants. But affordable multifamily residential buildings that you have that you can own corporatively or individually for 50 years, 100 years. That is the gold standard. So I think there is some real intelligence in this proposal, because I think this is going to be a good way to drive foreign investment, but in a way that really favors us, because we know that there is a real dearth of affordable multifamily rental housing in York Center and across the country. We're going to fix the mortgage stress test to stop discrimination of small business owners, contractors, and other non-permanent employees, including casual workers. I should tell you that this is a proposal that rings close to my heart. Most of my friends were married 2 years, and then they bought houses for themselves. At least on me, and I had to wait for 7 years because I had my own business and I worked for myself. And every time I went to the bank, they told me, "You're not quite there yet. Come back later." So and I think it segues a lot also with our millennial community. I know tons of millennials who are incredibly resilient and hardworking individuals, but they're working in the gig economy. They've got, a 3-month contract, a 6-month contract. They're doing multiple jobs at the same time. They're earning a living, and sometimes quite a good living, but they're a little bit like urban farmers. They don't know what the crops will yield until they yield. And of course, when you turn around and you go to the bank with that makes it very, very difficult. And very often what happens is that you're stuck with what we call secondary lenders, right? And instead of paying the nice, beautiful bank rate, the 3% or the 2% or whatever that is, now you're into the 7%, the 8%, and the impossibility of making it work for yourself, right? So I think this proposal is one that makes a lot of sense for the residents of York Center. We're going to create 7 to 10-year mortgages for first-time home buyers and lenders to encourage stability and reduce the need for mortgage stress tests, which essentially have been unfair. They've been penalizing millennials, they've been penalizing minorities, they've been penalizing immigrants, they've been penalizing women, and especially single mothers, right? And so I think that's going to be a good message of relief that's going to give access to housing, because especially in New York Center, for many folks, their retirement is not so much RRSPs as it is the family home. And the inability to get into the family home soon enough becomes regressive. That extra 5 years or 10 years that it takes you is that many more years of work that you're going to have to do before you can retire. And it also, like I said, while I remember my friends in 2 years into marriage being able to afford a home and buy a home, the 7 years that Lisa and I had to wait, every year, the prices was going up. And so while year 1, I was able to, year 2, I would have, I had enough down payment to buy. Well, by the time year 3 rolls around, boy, oh boy, I felt like I was always back at the starting line. So I think, I was very receptive to these proposals. We're going to increase the limit on eligibility for mortgage insurance and index it to home price inflation, allowing those in high-priced real estate markets with less than a 20% down payment an opportunity. That I think is also resonates a lot for me. I think the country is wonderful. I mean, I've lived in Quebec. I've lived in New Brunswick as an immigration lawyer. I've traveled the country where I've had clients settle all across the country. A lot of them in Saskatchewan. So the country's fantastic. But the practical reality, we have less geographic mobility than Americans have. That's just a practical reality. Americans live in New York, but then they'll move to Miami, they'll move here, they'll move there, they'll get jobs. It's been less of a Canadian reality. And at the same time, when prices of housing having become so regressive, it's basically become impossible for the second generation or the third generation to be able to remain in York Center, right? And it used to be, we'll move to Thornhill or we'll move to Richmond Hill, but that's become incredibly regressive as well, especially for millennials. And so the concern here is that there's nothing wrong with Thunder Bay or Happy Valley, Goose Bay or Fredericton, New Brunswick, don't get me wrong, but you're very, very far from family. And you also don't benefit from the community and the ecosystem that your family and your community and, has built over a century. right? And that's quite unfortunate. So this proposal, I think, is really catered to urban Canadians who are facing the practical realities that we are facing. Less down, the opportunity to be able to afford a home, buy a home with less down payment, especially when the interest rates are low. I think that's going to resonate and help a lot of people.
Well, thank you for that very thorough answer. Very, very interesting. I have to apologize to you, Joel. I kind of skipped around the questions and you were very, very flexible with that. But Abraham has asked me to kind of stick to the right order, and I'm going to do that from now on. So I do want to recognize how flexible you've been with my questions. I'm going to go back to question number 2 and just work my way through the ones I haven't asked. So question number 2 is, do you support mandatory vaccination programs being brought in by current governments for their employees and for other workplaces? As a secondary question about that, do you support vaccine passports and do you support lockdowns?
No need to apologize. I really am very grateful and thankful for the opportunity to be speaking with the community in the manner. In terms of the vaccine, the mandatory vaccine question, right? I would say this. First of all, I'm proud to be vaccinated. And I should tell you that my campaign team is vaccinated. As a 47-year-old racialized Canadian, I mean, I was petrified of COVID-19. I thought that I was going to be a goner. I was very scared of dying from this. Because quite frankly, a lot of people of my demographics really fit the bill for having acute disease. I would see pictures of folks in the hospital and, in those ICU beds and, with their tummies and their faces facing the bed and the backs of their necks and heads and shoulders look exactly like mine. So I shed a tear as soon as I got my first vaccine, and I'm, very grateful to be vaccinated. I also, having a Haitian father, was born in 1936. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Western medicine. I mean, my father, would advocate and remind the family of the years when there was no vaccines in Haiti. There were no antibiotics, and for them, even in Creole, they have vocabulary for it because it was entire communities for them. Resurging from the dead, being able to stay alive because infections and lack of access to Western medicine had grave consequences. And he remembered that transformation as a child. So I support incentives and explanations to increase vaccination rates. I should tell you that we support wide development of rapid testing. That's the 30 minutes or so for people who are unable to get vaccinated. That said, I am skeptical of mandates for a number of reasons. Firstly, as a human rights lawyer, I think it's very questionable whether they're in accordance with our Charter of Rights. In most countries, including in Canada, it's historically marginalized or minority groups that have been the most under-vaccinated. And I would not be willing to exclude a huge percentage of First Nations or racialized Black Canadians or New Canadians from society. Even the civil service under Justin Trudeau released a statement essentially repeating Erin O'Toole's plan. Vaccines, yes, of course, absolutely, but rapid testing and other measures if not willing or able to do so. And we were told throughout the pandemic, we have to, listen to our experts and the federal experts on the issues from the Treasury Board. They've mirrored basically the Conservative Party position when it comes to mandates. I think the issue has been politicized, especially in the campaign. I think it's created a divisive us versus them mentality in society. And I think that's fairly reflective of what we've seen, south of the border. And I think we have to continue our solidarity and continue. We have to continue being united. I think turning COVID into a partisan issue when it shouldn't be is not advisable. And so ultimately, yes, vaccines, absolutely. Rapid testing, absolutely. And I think our energies and our efforts should be made to go into the communities who are historically disenfranchised, scared of vaccines because of historical abuses that were done. I mean, you know, there's a whole history of Afro-North Americans being used as guinea pigs for generations. And you know about the of First Nations in the healthcare system. So I think caution and probity is really the order of the day. And ultimately, also, I think based on the expertise that I've seen and the advice that was received by the current federal government, I think it's questionable whether a mandate would actually even be effective. We haven't really seen and understood any data that would supports that idea. In terms of vaccine passport, do I support a vaccine passport? I should tell you that our party supports enabling Canadians to be able to prove vaccination for foreign travel or places that mandate the vaccine, but again, not mandatory on the federal level. Anyone who can't would obviously need to take a rapid test or make alternative arrangements. This is also the position of our civil service. And I think there's been some political disingenuousness by the other political party, by the political party in power to pretend otherwise.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to mention to people who started late, they're posting some questions, and I had mentioned that after this formal question period, there will be a Q&A. If you prefer me or Dan to read out your question, we're happy to do that, but please don't worry, we will get to them. Thank you. Okay, so next question. Mental health has been a huge issue for everyone during the pandemic. It was obviously a huge issue even before the pandemic and will continue to be a chronic issue in our society. How do you and your party think about and address the variety of mental illnesses issues at play in our country?
You know, it's been part of our policy of securing the future of our framework to address mental health issues head on. You know, as a country, I think we must recognize that mental health is health. Only Canada's Conservatives, as far as I'm concerned, have a plan to make historic investments in mental health and addiction. We support an increase of $60 billion over 10 years to go to the provinces to address healthcare needs, which includes mental health care. Specifically, work with provinces and transfer enough money to enable 1 million more Canadians to access mental health care. To encourage employers to add mental health to their benefit packages or increase their coverage by paying a 25% tax credit. We want to implement a national suicide prevention hotline. And last but not least, we want to make the largest investment in Canadian history for Indigenous mental health and drug treatment of $1 billion for culturally appropriate supports. I should tell you, it was fascinating from a practical perspective in my practice. I've seen mental health trauma with my employees during the pandemic, in my neighborhood, with families, especially a lot with clients, especially clients who were essential service workers. My clients who were working in factories, the people who kept the lights on for all of society, people working in LTCs. And working in nursing homes. I mean, what they saw was absolutely horrendous during the pandemic and what they experienced. And, you know, it's been, before the pandemic, I look at my practice, Andrea, and my practice was what I call a solicitor's practice, where it was a positive practice. It was people opening business, people making deals, it was, you need a lawyer to put the contracts together, to put the structures together, but to help the economy grow and people have better fulfilled lives. And as the pandemic started and progressed, I would say it was the opposite. Forget being a solicitor, it was more of a barrister's life where businesses were falling apart, where partners in partnership were collapsing, where you know, all of a sudden it was all about litigation. It was the negative, it was people being in court. But what really struck me the most was, and what's in terms of my experience is, and I think it resonates with a lot of other professionals I've spoken to, is how, in essence, my family law practice didn't double or triple, it went up by 100%. And I can promise you that, there is a mental health component and in relation to families who've broken apart. And I really blame the pandemic for this increase, because it can't be to me that over 20 years of practice, you've got a certain vertical of family law disputes, and all of a sudden, we're into this pandemic with all these families facing all this trauma, and then your numbers jump 100%, and it's been sectorial. So I think there's a real need for this support, and I certainly welcome it. Andrew, I'm sorry, I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, switching to question number 7. Do we have the infrastructure and resources to take on more refugees in our country?
Well, I mean, firstly, I've been a refugee lawyer for 20 years, and the issue is constitutional, and it also relates to treaty obligations, and it's an international law issue. So, of course, we have a legal obligation under the convention to welcome convention refugees. It's undoubtable, and the refugee board was implemented I believe in 1988 by the conservative Mulroney government, and the institution has continued on under many governments, and Canada has maintained its obligation in relation to refugees ever since. Now, I think the question becomes an issue of infrastructure and logistics as well. So essentially, those who wish to come to Canada deserve a plan that provides clarity and a process that treats them with dignity, compassion, and respect. The Liberal government record when it comes to immigration is one of mismanagement, years-long backlogs, and failure. I mean, we've got processing times where people who actually qualify to bring their families, I've seen it time and time again, individuals in the Filipino community who are caregivers, PSWs, who've qualified who are now permanent residents. And so by law, they're entitled to sponsor their families. They meet the financial thresholds to do so. So nobody's asking for special favors here. And, you've got processing backlogs that are 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. With absolutely no justification. Very often it's because Canada has chosen to open consular offices, multiple consular offices in some countries and not in others. So for example, traditionally Western European countries had a lot of Canadian consular offices, even though you didn't have a lot of application or immigration coming in from France or from Germany or Italy. But when it came to countries that had a high rate of immigration to Canada, certainly a high rate of demand for immigration to Canada, the Philippines, for example, a paucity of consular offices and officials in terms of processing times. Applications get sent across the waters to other third-party countries where they're processed in Canadian offices, papers get lost, it becomes a big mess, and there's really, quite frankly, no need for that. So backlogs, failures, I think we must do better at recognizing foreign credentials. That's certainly part of our party position. Historically, it's been terrible. I've had a dear friend of mine, a medical doctor, an incredible doctor, who I think took almost a decade to retrain because of the lack of credentials being recognized. At one point in time, he was working as an apple picker. These are tragedies because all of us lose. The individual loses. They're losing some of their best productive years, and came under the promise that something like this was never going to happen. But we lose as Canadians as well, because we lose the services of people who could help us. And so you're in the emergency room and you're waiting 10 hours and you're thinking, well, why is that? Or you've got Canadian communities in rural areas or in smaller provinces, which is, who have their ER shut down because they don't have any doctors. So I think that's a good example. Also, obviously, we need to keep our solemn promises to our allies who risk their lives for Canada and love Canada. Afghanistan is obviously top of mind. We know that there are many Canadian women and little girls who are in Afghanistan who are now under the regime of the Taliban and who have not been able to escape and have not been able to come here. These are Canadian citizens. At the same time, we've got people who risked their lives while we were there in Afghanistan for us, to help us, because they believe in democracy, because they believed in gender equality, because they believed in human rights. They took great chances in front of their communities, in front of their societies, by being allies with us. And they've been left behind, of course. So it's a terrible stain on our international human rights story. This is not a good chapter. But obviously, we need to protect human rights. We need to, we aim to, I think we have to also look at the supply chain legislation that we're proposing to meaningfully enforce Canada's commitment not to import products made with slave labor. We know that persecuted Christians, Uyghurs, and Falun Gong practitioners in China are forced to work in slave labor type situations, in slave labor prisons. And so every day, all of us are walking and living with products that were manufactured that way. And it forces our complicity, unfortunately, in those crimes. We want to make it a criminal offense for someone to go abroad to participate in or benefit from a serious violation of human rights, such as forced organ harvesting and trafficking. And we want to limit the ability of the government to grant waivers permitting human rights abusers to come to Canada. And again, I think that a good example that I gave was the fact that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard was still not on the terror list, right? And so you do, at the same time that you have Afghani allies who are unable to be here today and profit from and benefit from the veil of protection that they helped carve for us while we were there. You do at the same time have year in and year out people who are gross human rights abusers and violators who qualify and who come to Canada and who walk our streets.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Just being mindful of the time, we are at 7:40, just so we have quite a few questions to get through. I'm going to go back. Unfortunately, I inadvertently missed one of our questions, question number 4. I'm going to go back to that now, Joel. So how is your government going to raise the funds needed to get the deficit under control that has really ballooned as a result of COVID-19?
Andrea, I think I partially addressed it a little earlier, but I think I can quickly and succinctly advance the points that are of importance to us. The bottom line is we really feel as a party that aggressive deficit fighting is not in order right now because we just don't have the economy, especially at the Main Street level, that can support it. My plazas at Steeles and Dufferin, been there for more than a decade. Before that, I was at Finch and Dufferin. That's where I spend 20 hours of my day working. Sometimes I get to bed a little earlier, of course. But I mean, the plaza is empty. And the other day I was in an office building and there was, I think, 2 tenants in the entire building. You have the restaurants are closed, the small businesses are closed, they've gone under. And so until we put together the processes to re-energize Main Street. And I gave examples of the wage subsidies, our plan for 1 million new jobs. I can talk to you about the HST holiday also that we're planning. That's for small businesses. So that's not for the big boxes. We're not talking about Amazon and e-commerce. They're doing perfectly fine. They don't need your money. They get a lot of your money. The cable companies and the cell phone companies. And by the way, I should tell you, I get about 20, since I've been a candidate, I get about 25 to 30 emails a day about cell phone, cost of cell phone. It's the #1 issue that I get in my inbox, which is a surprise to me. I'm sensitive to it. I get it. This is really, really bad. It's very, very expensive, and I don't like it at all, right? No big fan of the big telecoms, especially because they are protected. They are protected by regulation, right? I mean, you have a whole regulatory framework that gives them opportunity to make business, and then that veil of protection is used then to give you insane internet and cell phone costs, which is obviously very regressive again to our young, to our millennials, to our poorer. We know that under the pandemic, how many kids in public school just didn't have access to the Zoom, right? They didn't have access to stable internet, right? And so obviously create a two-tier society in relation to education. So very, very sensitive to all of that. But really our plan is to say, listen, we're still under a crisis situation. We're under the 4th wave. It's not time to come in and exercise great surgery on this economy because it is extremely fragile. Let's get everything back. Let's get the economy going. Let's stabilize inflation. Let's stabilize home prices. Let's get the new generation that's younger than me, our millennials, into this economy and stabilize that. And I think the proposal by us to do it over 10, and then to tackle the deficit within 10 years, I think that shows a lot of smarts and caution and prudence. And what I would also say is, as a little dig, and I think it's a fair one, under the Liberals, we've had a lot of promises over 6 years, tons of elections, and not a lot of fulfillment. We do have a track record in history, if you look at our previous Harper government, of saying what we do and doing what we say. So I think the number of crunchers, as far as I'm concerned, feel and understand and respect that this is a good way forward.
Okay. So question number 10, thinking about our riding, the people, the businesses, and the geography, what do you see as some York Centre initiatives that can play a role in combating climate change?
I think there's not tons. I mean, we're not in Alberta in the middle of the oil sands. I mean, in terms of York Centre, I don't think there's tons that is specific to York Centre, but there is really opportunities as well still, right? We can certainly encourage mass transit use. That's perfect for the environment. We can build as much of the new housing as possible near mass transit for obvious reasons, and that obviously curbs urban blight and the escape to you had historically the outer suburbs, but now we're talking about the outer suburbs. But obviously, as a federal government, we need to work very closely with the province and the city on that. I would add, though, and this is very interesting. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of elected stakeholders during this campaign at the city level, at the provincial level. There is a mass frustration with the federal government. Mass frustration, because they've got ideas, they've got initiatives. There are tons of great citizen initiatives, and the Bachelor's Manor Action Group has been very energetic in getting things done. And it's been wonderful to see, because you've got, we know there's a lot of partisanry. Some people are liberals, some people are conservatives, but when it comes to very often the best interest of the manor itself, there's really this ability to put politics aside very often and get things done. Now, Dallas is very special as an area of Toronto in comparison with other areas. And in that vein, what makes it special to me, obviously, is Downsview Park, right? I mean, there's not a lot of writings with that level of acreage that's still untapped, undeveloped, and unorganized, right? You don't have that in Eglinton Lawrence, you don't have that in St. Paul's, and you don't have that in Thornhill in the 905. And I believe that, don't get me wrong, but I think the Canada Lands Company is about $40 million a year of costs, not revenues, because they also have the CN Tower, et cetera. But I feel that there's a real lack of synergy between what they are trying to do in Downsview and what the citizenry of York Centre wants. Especially the residents around the Downsview Park area, especially the residents of the western part of the riding, Keele and Shepherd, and Keele and Wilson. And you've had historical promises that were really acclaimed, where at one point in time they had promised 200 acres of green space and of greenery. And in that context, I think of the the Mountain in Montreal, which is a wonderful park that was built by the same forestry engineer that built Central Park in New York. You've got Millennium Park Square in Chicago. And so here you have here in Toronto, this amazing opportunity for environmentally sound development and fantastic green space. And yet, decade after decade, it's disorganized, and there is a lack of synergy between what the citizens want, very often in conjunction with the city planners, and what the federal government is doing there. So I think that's an area to go to. I would also segue this with the housing plan that we were talking about before. If you recall, and I forgot to mention this, I believe there are 37,000 edifices that the federal government owns. So don't get me wrong, I don't have my notes here, my figure right in front of me, but basically there's tons. And there's going to be an allocation for many of those properties to be sold in order to create multifamily housing. And so again, in the context of using federal lands, federal properties, in order for them to benefit local residents. So obviously, I'm certainly in favor of keeping some of our existing green space, Downsview Park, Earl Bales. I think we need it for many reasons, including mental health and the environment. We also support the increased use of nuclear and hydropower, especially the new mini nuclear reactors. It's the best combination for safety, extremely reliable and carbon-free energy. Affordable energy is crucial, as is our environment. I'm certainly not an environmental engineer, don't have scientific background or knowledge in relation to that, but I can tell you, and you know that my focus, like I've said, if you Google my name, you'll see it's been human rights for 20 years, right? And my television production. So it's not my area of expertise, of course, but I would tell you this: I was quite welcoming of Aaron O'Toole's courage in the spring, where he was at that point in time at the lowest ebb of his popularity, and he basically adopted a climate change related platform and took a great risk doing so. That is basically akin and is in lockstep with the ideals and the environmental goals of all our Western allies. And I think that's really important. And by the way, if you notice, it hasn't been a real hot topic of debate in the campaign, certainly by the Prime Minister, by Liberal leader Justin Trudeau and the other parties, because I think we've reached parity in terms of meeting these Western nation goals in relation to carbon tax and carbon initiative. And I think obviously that's going to have the implementation of these environmental goals is going to have an impact on all the residents of York Centre. I welcome them, and I welcome the courage of Aaron O'Toole in that regard, because there was certainly no guarantee that he was going to be able to survive that at the time, and he has, and now he has a roster of 338 candidates who have agreed with the platform on the environment, and who will be pushing it in Parliament if we are elected.
Okay, thank you. So our next question is, how will you support the preservation of agricultural land for agricultural purposes?
You know, protecting the small family farm, I think, is essential. People want to eat better. There is a fiduciary relationship with the family farm where you can have organic, when you can have healthy. When the farm is owned by a family, they are stakeholders. They're small business people, as opposed to big agro. And we know what happens with big agriculture. I mean, we've seen enough documentaries on the issue. So on this note, I can tell you that the Conservatives will ensure the sale of a family farm to a family member is not taxed at a higher rate than a sale to a stranger. I mean, it's an amazing thing to me that that's the case, that you've got a family that's put 200 years, 300 years on a chunk of land, and they're basically dispossessed because there's no advantage to the sale being bought by a family member. And as you know, and I know this as a small business owner, the family farmer is rich on paper, but that's not wealth that can be used, right? You're not going to sell your tractor, and you're not selling your barn, and you're not selling your land. So on the paper, they're multimillionaires, but in reality, they're not, right? And they're always usually one season away from extinction. And that's something that that I understand wholeheartedly as a small business person. So Canada's Conservatives will ensure our farm safety net programs are predictable, bankable, and manageable. A Conservative government will implement a plan to tackle rural crime and ensure farm families feel safe. It's been a real issue. I mean, we still have the exodus. It was obviously more of a phenomenon in the 30s and 40s and 50s, but you still have the exodus from rural agricultural life into urban life. And it's an easier direction one way than the other direction. I mean, personally, I know that I do have on my maternal grandparents' side, we are from a shtetl near Tarnów, Poland, but that was 100 years ago. I mean, there's no going back to that life. Even if I wanted to, I would not be very successful, I am sure. So I think this is a good proposal. We understand that agriculture is an economic powerhouse with a global reputation for safe, high quality products. Many parts of the sector, however, are hampered by chronic labor shortages across all skills levels. I know something a little bit about that because for a generation, I've worked with the foreign workers who come seasonally and who work in our farms. They pick the potatoes, the apples, the strawberries. It's been historically a very successful program for both our Canadian agricultural sector and also for people from impoverished third world countries who come and can make a better life for themselves and who have access to better capital to be able to assist their families. A Conservative government will develop a long-term strategy to attract skilled workers to the meat processing sector, you should know, which is currently facing a 30,000 worker deficit. This is putting Canada's supply chains at risk and harming our long-term competitiveness.
Okay, so we have 4 questions left, but I'm going to turn them into 3 to get things moving along. The first question, which I think is near and dear to a lot of our neighbors' hearts, is what is the Conservative government's platform for a national autism strategy?
Just segue a little bit personally to how I ended up in York Centre myself. I came, my first experience with the area was as a 13-year-old from New Brunswick. There was a lot of anti-Semitism back home and Holocaust deniers, and there were a lot of programs to get the kids from New Brunswick out of our hometown and spend quality time in the Jewish community here. And so I remember at 13 years old finding myself in York Centre, and this is how I came to fall in love with the place. And as a 14-year-old, I went to work and I was trained at Camp Rena. And at the time, I believe the headquarters were in York Centre. Rena is a wonderful charity that specializes in providing assistance to people with autism and Down syndrome. And I was trained in their leadership development program and worked there as a camp counselor. And years later, when it was very hard when I got called to the bar back in those days for people of color to find placement in law firms. And so I finished, I think, fifth in my grade, my last year of law school back home. And I thought I'd have a job right away. And unfortunately, I went from town to town to town to town looking for work. And you always understand the reflex for home. You always look at the map and you look at the place you were born anytime you pass a map. And that was my experience. And then I thought, it can't work for me anywhere else. I tried Toronto, and having had great experiences in York Center, and the first place I moved once I was here was at 6020 Bathurst, where I first resided. And then looking for work, at the time there was no internet like we have today, or cell phones like we have today. I had the big Fido phone, and I would drive down Bathurst and I would look for signs with of lawyers on the windows, and I would call them and I say, "Hey, my name is Joella from Moncton. I need work." And 3 weeks later, I did find work, and I've never looked back ever since. But to segue specifically to the autism strategy, what I'm essentially trying to say is that I'm incredibly sensitive to the issue. And I know that during the pandemic, especially, the challenges for families increased 100-fold. And it's just been a terrible, terrible experiences. I've knocked on over, Andrea, I should tell you, and Dan, I've knocked on over 7,000 doors since the writ. I think it's been important to go to the families and speak to them about their lives. And obviously, there are many families who are suffering tremendous trauma, caring for a caregiver, acting as caregivers for kin and relatives who suffer from autism, and it's to me in life, when I speak with people, it's when you hear corroboration, it brings a special echo. And it doesn't matter where the home is, in the manor or at Wilson, or a little bit at York Downs, or on the west side. The list of difficulties is really, really the same, and the list of challenges. And so I get it. So specifically in terms of the autism strategy, we want to give provinces as much flexibility as possible. So we will increase overall the health funding by $60 billion over 10 years. And certainly autism can be considered part of our overall mental health approach. I would also say this, and this is something that I know a little bit about as a person who loves constitutional law. The provinces and the cities have tons to do. They have no money. I mean, historically, when I wanted to give the example, I would always say to people, go to 361 University, go to the registry, right? That's where 90% of all the law cases in Toronto are being filed, right? You've got 10 booths and you've got 1,000 people waiting. Go to the federal court across the street, you've got 10 booths, you've got 2 people waiting. The federal government has the money, the provinces don't have the money. And so in this vein, I would be the type of person who would really want to keep our government, the Conservative government, accountable on this. They need the money, in order to facilitate and increase assistance in overall health, which includes autism.
I think we'll move to the next question just in interest of time as well, but thank you for that answer. Just 2 more questions. So one is about the resurgence of the Taliban. I know you referred to it earlier in the Q&A session, and it's the question of the recognition of legitimate governments. Let me start again. With the resurgence of the Taliban, the question of the recognition of legitimate governments has become an issue. Do you think Canada should recognize the Taliban as the government and work with them on foreign affairs matters?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There's no need to. And why would we go there? There is an important Liberal MP who was criticized during the election for calling the Taliban our brothers. I mean, it shows a certain mindset, a lack of sensitivity. It's a real problem to me. And their track record in relation to the treatment of women and little girls is atrocious and appalling. the old refugee lawyer in me, and I haven't done a refugee hearing in a long while, but I mean, when I used to go, there were countries that were so horrendous that the examiner, the decision maker, the refugee judge wouldn't take long to make a decision. And as opposed to countries where there was skepticism about whether or not a person was a genuine convention refugee. What does that do? Conditions of that country really meet the definition of a person who's a refugee? Now, I mean, as the advocate, I was always going to argue that it did, but there were countries that were such, and Falun Gong practitioners from China, people who, women, girls, and democracy activists from Iran, right? North Korea, of course, but Afghanistan. I mean, that for us was a 5-minute hearing. Such were the conditions that were such are the conditions there. So no, absolutely not. A conservative government will not recognize the Taliban as a legitimate government of Afghanistan. The use of force by the Taliban is completely unacceptable currently and historically. We just commemorated 9/11, 20 years, and that was this week. A conservative government will also commit to ensuring aid provided to the Afghan people does not end up in the hands of the Taliban regime. We've seen how they're driving around now in American Jeeps and tanks, etc. The situation in Afghanistan is devastating, Canada's latest chapter on Afghanistan is atrocious and appalling. I understand that other Western countries have not fared any better, but we used to be, I would say this, I mean, as a country of responsibility and consequence, we used to be the canary in the coal mine. I'll never forget, and I'm sensitive to this as a Black person, how Brian Mulroney challenged Margaret Thatcher when it came to apartheid. I mean, he got the Commonwealth to essentially stop apartheid. It was the beginning of the end. And it wasn't long after the Mulroney intervention that we had Barbara Frum on television interviewing Mandela, who was released and asking him, Mr. Mandela, are you bitter? I mean, we'll always remember that interview, right? And so in that context, Canada can lead. We can be the moral voice. We can say no. We can say you are not prepared. We can say, look at what's coming around the corner. This is not acceptable to us, right? And it's not just a conservative example. I mean, Jacques Chrétien was criticized for not sending troops to Iraq, Canadians to Iraq, and historically he was proved to be right on the issue. So I think it's we've had responsible behavior and moral conduct in a nonpartisan way historically, and I certainly think that this is a perfect example where you should have shown leadership, and it's really not too late to show leadership. And the first aspect of leadership is absolutely not. We cannot recognize the Taliban.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a very clear answer to that question. Last of all, sort of a double-barrel question, and it's really regarding our group here. One is, how will you engage with the constituents in our riding? And what if would you ever be willing to speak out or go against the messaging and position of your party if the constituents, we, make it clear that we don't agree with the party's position or your position?
In my canvassing, I've taken a very populist approach. They train us that we shouldn't be spending too much time at the doors because we have to knock on many, many doors. And when I get into a really good conversation, what I do is I give my cell phone and I say, elected or not, and if you want to speak to me after the campaign, here's the cell number that I've had for 25 years. Call me, we'll talk, and I'll always hear and I'll always listen because I think that's primordial. The consequences of human rights abuse have essentially brought about my existence. I wouldn't, I'm the children of survivors on the one hand, and political dictatorship in Haiti on the other hand, right? And so it would be a real stain, I think, on my character if all of a sudden I were, for political reasons, to take a position that was a moral position, that was believed by the constituents, and that was the reasonable thing to do. And then, for political expediency, I would reject that. I mean, that's just not me. I'm not interested in politics that way. And so far as, thank God, I don't need it. I've got a good life. I'm a busy person. I employ a lot of people, 20 people in the law firm. When Rising Suns is actually filming, we had a cast and crew of 700 people at one point in time. So don't need it. Only interested if I can do good. If I am being too naive and that's not possible, then, even if elected, it won't be a long stay. I'll give you a perfect example, I think, that works. Last year, I have a client who was falsely accused as a racialized healthcare worker of bringing COVID into the province of New Brunswick. He was lambasted all over social media, all over the news, and he was singled out by the premier of the province. And the premier of that province is conservative. And at that time, I took the case on and I defended him. And obviously we were able to prove, as verified by, as it happens, and the Fifth Estate, that what happened was scapegoating and racialized singling out, that it wasn't fair. And we were able to prove that he was not guilty of having done anything. He was vindicated in court this year. But even though I had political ambitions, at the time, I was not the candidate for York Centre, but I'm pretty confident that it was not the political expedient thing to do than to actually go on the offensive against a conservative premier, especially in my home province. But I had no issues doing it. I didn't think about it for a second. I would have done it again. I would do it again. And I'm sure if this gentleman was a voter in York Centre, he wouldn't be voting for me. My community engagement in York Centre has deep roots. I am involved with the Knights of Rizal. There's a wonderful bust of Jose Rizal, which was, Jose Rizal is the shining beacon of human rights and democracy in the Filipino community as a historical figure. There's a wonderful bust of Jose Rizal in Earl Bales Park. I'm very involved in all the community events of the Knights of Rizal. I've been with them, and it's nonpartisan. We've got liberals and other people from all sorts of parties that are involved with the Knights of Rizal. I've been involved with the Lions Club, the Maharlika Lions Club chapter. It's the largest Filipino chapter of Lions Club. I was named the Lion of the Year in 2018, 2019. And so what I'm involved with a lot of different synagogues in the writing. And you know that I've been an employee in the writing. And so what I'm trying to say, and I'm sorry for the very long and circuitous soliloquy here, that I'm happy to be involved with all our groups and with all our community endeavors on a daily basis, all the time in York Centre. I know that the Bathurst Manor group does fantastic things. And I mean, more recently, I've attended a lot of the vaccination clinics and a lot of the City of Toronto endeavors that have been community events that have involved Councillor Pasternak and his office. I've spent a lot of time with all the other community stakeholders. And so, you know, whatever it is that you want me to do, it's go pick up garbage in a park, or paint a fence, or get rid of graffiti, or help liaison with the community police liaison at the community police station. I'm very, very happy to be involved and understand why that's important.
Thank you so much, Joelle, for all of your very, very thoughtful answers. We really appreciate the time you took to come and chat with us today. I'm actually going to stop the recording right now so that we can open it up. We don't have too many people on the line right now, but just open it up to some questions. So I'm going to stop recording.